Well, hello, Sid Thompson here. I've got someone on tonight. I'm going to take an interview. I'm getting back in the interview gig here, not the Simple Plays podcast, just a Sid talking sports with some people from back home in my hometown of Roseau. My guest tonight, my inaugural guest, I guess, is Don Ross, who played high school hockey in Roseau, led them to Minnesota State High School championships back in 58 and 59, an undefeated season. And Don and I could talk about that in 58, 59. He later went on to play 4 years at the University of North Dakota. In addition to that, in his Olympics appearance, he had Olympic appearances in 64 and 68 as well. Don also skated for U.S. teams in 66, 67, 71 World Championships, and the B Worlds in 70, and played a little bit for Klagenfurter over there in Austria. And I believe he won 3 championships over there. We'll discuss that. Uh, Back in that 59 season, and I think that he said that's to be debated, but they were 31 and 0 with a 4-2 triumph over the Minneapolis Washburn game in title game. And Don was a junior, excuse me, and scored 3 goals in that game. And we'll show a picture of that kind of remembrance with him and Coach Elmquist. Played with the Stordals, went on to the University of Minnesota, where Don went on to play for the Fighting Sioux, now the Fighting Hawks, excuse me, to be politically correct. And in 63, won a NCAA division title there. I believe, too, when we'll talk about that, one of only 4 Americans on that squad. In 64 and 68, the Olympic teams. So only 2 people from Roseau done that. I think Rube Bjorkman was the other one, and Don Ross playing in the 64 and 68 teams. And he also, I believe, which we could talk a little about, why not pro? I think he was also invited to the Bruins, talked about inviting him to camp, and the Canadians, but he preferred the amateur hockey and kind of topped it off into his 60s. And that's what's going to be most interesting is talking about playing in the, I don't know if it's a senior National Olympics or whatever you want to call it, but they won 3 consecutive titles playing for Buffalo Trucking back in the Senior Olympics. I welcome Don Ross, Roseau native, Roseau Ram graduate, Olympian. Don, pleasure mine to have you on here and talk a little hockey. Thanks for coming on and chat with me tonight.
No problem. No problem. Always good to talk hockey.
You bet. Don, I'm going to throw up a few pictures, and I want to take and start with that, kind of going back with, before we get into just really jumping in. But I want to show this picture here. If you can see that. Third guy on the left from Austria there. You're that young man there. What were you, a freshman there as a high school and your first time playing in high school for the Rams?
Yep, I was a freshman that year, and you can see the old St. Paul Auditorium there. That was close to a locker room. I don't know if that was in it or not, but different facilities than they have nowadays for the state tournaments.
Absolutely. So why don't let me ask you this. Let's talk about growing up in Roseau because, your career span, a lot of different state titles, national, playing a national championship, but times have changed. So, I mean, we're in 2024 now, 2024, right? I played with your sons and you've seen a lot, right? Because back in Roseau, the rink was built in the 40s. There wasn't a lot of indoor ice facilities back then when you were playing. So talk about your, growing up in town there and, skating outside, skating on lakes, ponds, wherever, and then being able to make it and play on the Rams and go on to state titles. So can you talk a bit about how that was growing up back then?
When I was growing up, there wasn't any organized hockey. I shouldn't say that there wasn't any, but all we had was a Saturday morning league, which is just a bunch of kids being sponsored by town businesses. They gave us some sweatshirt jerseys, and we played every Saturday morning, and that was it. The rest of the time, we were on our own, playing in outdoor rinks, grabbing the sticks, going anywhere. It was mostly pickup hockey all the time, anywhere we could find ice. Eventually, it got into the outdoor rinks, but we would skate on farmers' fields that were flooded in the fall, ditches that would get froze over, and so forth. Not all the time, but that was our start. And then we would spend a lot of time. Sometimes we would have to scrape the ice of the snow from the snowstorm or whatever, scrape it, then go with whatever we had 2, 3, 4, 5, a half a dozen players, 6, 8, 10 players. And that's what we did. Eventually, the Saturday morning league encompassed the first grade through sixth grade. And there was a gap in there between that and high school. So one of the team organizers or hockey gurus in town decided we got to have a Thursday night league for the sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth graders also to continue what had been started in the elementary program. And as a result, that was the kind of the feeder program. That's all it was for the Roseau High School team. Now, at those back in those days, also there were country schools in Salo, Malung, Wanaska. They all had their schools out there that went through the eighth grade. And so those teams were also entered into the Thursday Night League, I believe. And I'm not quite sure on that, but I'm sure they all played that. But that was it. We played one game a week, and you can't believe the anxiety coming into that Saturday morning league or that Thursday night league game because you're playing against your buddies. And one
Yeah.
thing you
Yeah.
want to do is go to school the next day and have to listen to somebody yuck it up and the winners the night before. And there was a lot of competition and that and so forth. The first organized hockey team I was ever on was when I think it was in eighth grade in that Thursday morning league or Thursday night league. And some of the senior parents, or the parents, I should say, not senior parents, but some of the parents came in and they started throwing jerseys at us. And they said, "What are these for?" And they said, "We're going down to St. Paul." I said, "Well," everybody said, "Well, what for?" It was the first VFW state hockey tournament in 1956. And they
Okay.
said, "Oh, okay, we're just going to St. Paul." We got on the cars, we went down to St. Paul. We played at a place called Palace Playground. You were on Rice Street in St. Paul. The boards were
Yep.
not legitimate. The rink wasn't legitimate. There was one locker room that we had to walk across boards to get to the rink. Both teams dressed in the same locker room. If you check somebody or hit them a little hard, they would roll over the boards and into the snowbank. There wasn't a lot of checking back in those days and so forth. Teams from Duluth, from the cities and so forth, we had no idea what we were getting into. All we knew is we got jerseys and we went to St. Paul. Then I think a Sunday afternoon we won the championship. I thought, well, I guess we won the championship. We didn't know still what's the big deal here, but we won and so forth. And all of a sudden, a couple of limousines pulled up along curbside, and out it gets the St. Paul Winter Carnival King and Queen and all their regalia to present the trophy to us. I thought, whoa, this I guess is bigger
Really?
than we thought. And that was the first organized team that I played on in 1956. 57, as you alluded to, that was my first year, the next year on the Rams hockey team. But the feeder system coming into the Roseau school A and B squad was fed by these little organized Saturday morning league, eventually Thursday night league, and then the schools in the country, Malung, Wanaka, Silo, and so forth, they went through the eighth grade. All those kids from all those teams came into Roseau, and would have 30, 40 kids trying out for Roseau's B team. So we had
Wow.
strong B teams, and then of course they fed into the A team, and we kept all these kids of all different sizes, shapes, and forms, whatever. They were kept playing all along, all the way through into that system, and of course some of them the cuts. So basically the first cuts that a lot of these kids experienced was at the B squad level in the high school program. Otherwise, everybody continued to play and skate.
Okay. But I got to back up. So you're telling me you played on the very first state VFW Bantam. So you're part of history there. The very first one.
Right, and there wasn't any coaches. We had parents that were organizers, but none of them had played the game. They didn't coach us. All they did was put the lines together and open the door, go out and play. So that's what we
Let
did.
them play. Had fun.
But
Okay.
none of them, including my parents, my dad came out of the cornfields of Iowa, knew nothing about the game. He ran a hardware store. I skated and so forth and grew up in hockey. And the only thing he would ever tell me and so forth, he could tell whether I worked hard or not. That was it.
Yeah, well, that's still good enough coach to get you. Hey, did you work hard? That's part of the game. So let me. I want to pull up a couple of these. I want to go up to these two tournaments again. This one here, and then at 59. So you played. I want to bring something up here, Don. That when you think of Roseau, most people, because we're talking about different eras, right? This is early on, 60 in the 50s. When you think of Roseau, they think of that Broughton, and Erickson line. But can you tell me, playing with the Stordals, because I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, doing my research about that Oscar didn't like to really keep track of stats. Was that correct? Because I had read someplace somebody stated that you guys probably scored 300 points in that line. Is that a
You
correct statement, you think?
I have no idea because what you heard was correct. Oscar, if he kept stats, we never talked about him. We never knew who was the team leader in scoring, anything. We
Okay.
never had. We That was just something that was never brought up.
So it's probably true then, because if they talk about it and it was never talked about, then it's probably true that you guys did have at least 300 points. Because when you look at Larry and Jim Stordahl, they did pretty well for themselves as well, and playing at the U and the Olympics as well. So
We had the
um,
two or three lines, but the other two or three lines that would come on, we were, yes, we were the first line that would go out and so forth. But we had the second and third lines. So these guys were, like I say, came off these school teams out in the country schools, came up through the Thursday night league. They all knew how to play the game, and they know all of them knew how to skate. They were all good skaters. So if anything, if they didn't score that much, they held their own against all the other competition and against their second and or third lines and so forth. So there was no big drop off in the lines. Maybe the production, yes, but not in the defensive part of the game.
yeah, and that's key. That's key to winning championships. You can't just rely on one line. So I want to throw up a picture here from that one title here, and I love this one because of the fact I see Oscar without his hat on, and I see you wearing it. Tell me about this experience. Look at these smiley faces in that picture, Don. That's bring back some memories there?
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago. Yeah, Oscar was not. I shouldn't say he wasn't emotional. He wasn't emotional about the wins. I can just remember him. He was emotional during the games because he would get so wound up, and a lot of it had to do with separating the two Stordals, keep them from fighting amongst the two of them, because either Larry would get a pass from Jimmy that wasn't quite on his stick, and Jimmy says, "Well, if you would have skated faster, you would have caught the pass." And Oscar had to step in between those two more than once, and Oscar would spit and sputter on the bench and so forth. But he never let a loss. A loss was never a loss. He just said, "Keep your head up. You don't get your dauber down," was one of his famous quotes. And
Yeah.
he was always positive after those games and so forth. But uh, he was just he was loud and so forth.
Oh yeah.
I can remember when I was, he only caught me loafing one time. And it was during the scrimmage. We did a lot of scrimmaging back with Oscar, and Oscar was on the ice. And one time I was loafing on a back check. I wasn't in the play, but I was not skating hard to get back. Ross, get moving. And that was the last time he ever had to say anything to me, because he had a big bellowing voice, and you didn't want to hear that directed at you.
Well, I heard stories about him, yes. And when I was a young goalie, he'd come out in the ice. Remember, he'd still come out in the ice and talk to the young kids, and you could hear that booming voice. I was told if you heard him yell across the hallway in the high school, you'd stop in your tracks. That type of voice. So
Oh yeah.
I got to show this picture too because I think this is a great one with you and him. Look at the smile. Talking about smiles. That's an awesome picture there, Don. Of those. What year is
Yeah,
that?
that could have been in St. Paul after that tournament, somewhere in there. I don't recall it. I've seen the picture. I've got the picture myself on a couple of pictures at home here. I don't recall exactly where it was because
I, I
it,
just
it,
I just love the fact that you're smiling and Oscar's smiling, and then that one with his hat off, you're wearing the hat, the fedora.
yeah,
I don't think I've seen him very often. He's like that's like Willard Eichel with that hat off. I don't see it very often when it
yeah,
was Oscar.
yeah.
So we had a tremendous high school career, and he moved on to the UND. At that time, they were still the Sioux. I'll still call them that, even though they're Fighting Hawks. And I want to pull up a few pictures of you here from this particular team. I believe on that. Where are you on here? You're on up top, I believe, right on the back there. You
Um,
changed from forward in high school and then went to play defense. And I believe this gentleman up to the far left, isn't that R.H. Peters, correct? Bob Peters, the legendary Bob Peters coaching on that team. So,
Bob
um,
Peters, the assistant coach and a grad student at the time. Our coach was Barry Thorndicraft, who was with the Montreal Canadiens back in his heyday. And
okay.
the word that we got about him was he was in the Montreal Canadian farm system, and the call up came for the next player to come up, and it was between Barry Thorndicraft and the Pocket Rocket.
Oh, well, we know how
And
that ended up. The old Pocket Rocket has
the
several championships.
Yep, and that was it for Thorndy. He said, "Okay, I'm out of here. I'm going to go to get my degree." And he came to University of North Dakota, and the rest is into coaching. I mean, that's what he ended up doing.
Okay. Was that how you kind of got that ties? I remember I mentioned in the intro the Montreal Canadiens. They kind of had an interest in you from him coaching. Did he bring them up to you, or bring you up to
No,
them?
no, there wasn't any of that kind of stuff at all brought up to me in my whole career. I back in the day, they didn't have a draft system, but what they had what they called a negotiation list. And if they put you on the list, they had to negotiate with you or talk to you within a certain period of time. And the only contact I ever had was at the golf course at Oakcrest Golf Course in Roseau. My dad, I was out golfing with him and whatever in the evening, and we got word that there was a car pulled up with three guys in it, and they wanted to talk to me and my dad. And they represented the Boston Bruins, and we were in the
Okay.
back of that car. And that was the extent of any talk I ever had with any pro team. There was no such thing as agents and so forth. And they wanted me, this was after my junior year, where we would just won the NCAA and so forth. And they wanted me to come to the Boston tryout camp. There was not
Okay.
offer, no talk of money, expenses, nothing. And I said, I feel obligated to the University of North Dakota and Barry Thornycraft that recruited me and so forth and so on. It might even been after the Olympics that year. I'm not sure if it was after the NCAA or the Olympics that year in '64 because I took a year off college too. So I can't remember exactly there, but that was the only time I was ever contacted and about going anywhere pro and so forth. And then the next talk came one time. I got a call from Murray Williamson, probably 5, 6, 7 years later, and it was after the World Tournament one time where he got a call from somebody representing the Montreal Canadiens, and they wanted to see if I wanted to go down to Dallas at the time and to play in that league on the weekends. I said I had been off skates now for 2 or 3 weeks, and I said, Murray, if I was ever going to try it, I said I'd rather be in better shape than I am right now. And I said no, I just wasn't interested. There again, there was that's how things were so-called negotiated back in those days. There were no agents that I knew of. I didn't know I have one or use them. No talk of money, no nothing. I never talked to anybody about professional hockey other than that. And back in those days, you know, I read the book, the life autobiography of Gordie Howe, and I know back in those days, I was a first year teacher making 60 in the low $6,000 a year. Gordie Howe in those days was working his way up to, I don't know if he ever got over $30,000 a year. So the money was not nearly what it is today. There was not no such
No,
thing
no,
no such things
no.
as signing bonuses, and if they were 1 year contracts, so the incentive to go and do that, and I thought, you know, it just never got to me that that was something I wanted to do.
Sure. And tough to make the original six. Only six teams back in that day, so it would have been
Well, there were
quite an
six teams.
accomplishment if you did.
There were six teams, and they were absolutely then really dominated by not only the Canadian players but Canadian management and so forth and so forth.
Yeah.
There was bias back there, more so than probably there is today, and so forth. And I just didn't feel comfortable looking what I had would have to probably go through to make a roster.
Sure, sure. No, it's understandable. I got to throw an action shot up at you here. I like the old lid you're wearing back then.
Yeah,
Oh, and that old logo. I missed that logo, if I do say so. I missed that old logo there that they had at UND.
yeah, they took that away, and I've got a tooth missing, and both shoulders are partially dislocated, and I've got a lot of stitch marks for fighting for that logo. And people that think that it was not held in high esteem were really wrong about what they did.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different topic we could talk about, but
Exactly.
we'll stick
Yep.
we'll,
It
we'll
is.
stick to hockey. So,
Yep.
so like I say, I wanted to make sure I threw this up because this is one thing that we talked about the high school and the college, but you're one of the top greatest of Minnesota history, so that needs to be pointed out. I forgot to put that when we're talking about the Ram days there, but let's go back after UND. I mean, I was looking at the Olympians and the national teams. You played on two Olympic teams. I mean, not too many people can say that. I mean, I think I'm correct me if I'm wrong. I thought Rube was the other one from Roseau, Rube Bjorkman. He played
I,
in maybe yes he did. Played in 48 and 52.
Right.
and you played in '64 and '68. So along
Yeah.
with Larry Stordahl in '68. So that's quite an accomplishment. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about playing in the Olympics and representing your country? Because that it's really
Well,
something not many people can say.
I was at the University of North Dakota at the time, and going back to Barry Thorndicraft, he kind of the only one that could suggested what my goal should be, and that was to play for the Sioux, freshman, sophomore, and then and junior year, whatever. But then he says, then you should think in terms of playing for the Olympic team. So he was the one that opened the door that this was going to be completely okay with me leaving and trying to make the Olympic team and so forth. Now, he might have had some inside information about people looking at me and so forth that I never did hear about, but he was okay with all that. So I went down to Wakota Arena that next fall and went through all the tryouts like everybody else, made the Olympic team and so forth. And then the plan worked. I played in the '64 Olympic team, came back and joined them in '65, and there was a great, not a great, but there was big turnover in the Sioux at that time because the guys that I came in with had now left. They were stayed there when I was gone for the Olympics. They stayed and finished out their careers in 1964. When I came back, there was a new batch of players that were now at UND, including guys like Denny Hextall. He was one of the new guys on the new kid on the block and so forth. So I went through a cycle of a couple of different groups of players and so forth at UND.
Okay. I got to throw up a couple pictures here. I don't know which one you like the most, but or what year they are, but there's one there with the old buzz cut. You were in the
Uh,
USA.
yeah, that I can't tell you. It's one or the other, but it looks.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what year
There's
it
one
is.
probably a little later in time. You got a little longer hair there. Look at that. That's a
Yeah,
brill cream. That's a brill cream look there, Don.
I'm a little dab of
Huh?
do a little dab of do you know that's
Yeah,
what
well,
they say.
I'm not going to be fit for that commercial, but those that
Uh,
know Brill Cream, remember Brill Cream, they're a little older. So, but
yeah, yeah.
um, looking at those rosters, the Olympics and the national teams, I look at some of the names you played with, and whether it be like I say in the Olympics or national teams, I see names like Herb Brooks. I saw Doug Wu, the Christians at some point he played with, the Stordals, Mayasich, um, Henry Boucher, and even Craig Patrick, who coached the '80 team with Herb Brooks. Those two were coaches of the '80. And of course, I'm a goalie guy, so I saw Lefty in there. Lefty Curran probably is one of the national teams. But
Yep,
can you
yep.
talk about some of these guys? I mean, these names that I mentioned. They're all icons in hockey, whether it be Minnesota or international hockey in general. I mean, who are
The,
some of the best memories you have playing with those guys? I mean, I
and then
mentioned those names. They're like that's a who's
yeah,
who.
and Louis Nanny was another one.
Oh, I forgot Luke. Jeez,
Another one is Bill Masterton. Marty Howe played at Denver. Bill
that's right,
Masterton.
Marty Hall. Yeah, he was on there too. I'm sorry.
And Bill Masterton was the first and only death in the NHL and so forth. I played with him the year before that he got he got he died playing for the North Stars the next year. But I
Yep.
guess I was really I think very fortunate in the timing of my career because I came through the system so to speak when Murray Williamson took over the helm there with the idea of keeping a nucleus of players together in Minneapolis, St. Paul, with minor turnover and so forth, and keeping a nucleus together to build and keep a national team and Olympic team together. And that was my time. And so therefore, I came in '64. The Olympic team was one thing, but then in '66, I joined a pickup team that was really that was where John Nasich came in and so forth. That was really a put together team at the last minute. But then 67, 68, 69, or somewhere in there, 71, 72, those were the Murray years. And I was part of that group that was held together and so forth. But my like you mentioned, my kind of, it was there again, so ironic that there's so many people that I was fortunate enough to play with, like the Craig Patrick, Louis Nanny. There's so many names that went on to in hockey in careers, in players, in management, in all that kind of stuff. And to this day, we've been in contact, not daily, but or yearly even, but we've had Olympic golf outings and so forth. And all the memories come rushing back and so forth. But there's so many of them that went on to careers that were, you know, quite brilliant, players and management.
Yep. And you mentioned Lou. I mean, it's Lou Nanny's last year at broadcasting. I talked to Tim Cortez
Right.
today at Artist, the former goalies in Duluth. He's commissioning a print for him.
Yep.
And that's the thing about hockey. You have all these relationships. I mean, I didn't play at a high level. I didn't play, state tournament necessarily or that, but I've got memories of all the people I've met. Every time you go to the state tournament, it's like a reunion, right? I seen you
Hmm.
there and you bump into people, and that's what hockey, and that's what the main thing about it's a team sport. Just all the memories and friends that you have for the rest of your life. I mean, I can look back and say, I remember playing with Steve and Mike. I can go back in the Pee Wee tournament sometimes, something pop in my head. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy just to think
The hockey, the
that's
hockey, the hockey family, or I should say, the family that is created by hockey players is unique to any other sport. I mean, the pros in different leagues and so forth, they have their camaraderie too. But as far as basketball, football, and so forth, hockey, there's people up here like you've seen hockey. You come to Roseau anytime. They're talking hockey year round. But the contacts you have made through your hockey careers many hockey careers, hockey just is a common bond that is never broken. It just stays together. You run into players, talk to players, and the memories are still there for all of us.
yeah, I can't stress that enough. That's why it's such a great sport. So, talking a bit about the players and that, and then after that, you went over the head coach here I coached with down in Winona. He played over in Europe, and like you mentioned, he played in Klagenfurter, if I'm pronouncing it right. So he mentioned the
Uh,
arena. He's like, "Oh yeah, I played there, this and that." And last year, Kathy kind of pulled a fast one on you, if I understand. She kind of arranged that reunion, and it sounds like it was a heck of a time. Can you talk a little bit about going back and bumping into some of those guys? And we talked about the camaraderie again, being able to bump into those teammates you played with back in what was it, 68 through 71, or I forget. You won 3 championships, though, if I'm correct. Am I incorrect in that?
uh, you're partially correct. First of all, it's Klagenfurt, and
Klagenfurt.
if you played there, you're a Klagenfurter. Okay.
Okay, okay.
All right. Now the three championships, I won two, but Gary came over there also and won one.
He won the third. Okay.
Yeah, he won the third. But yeah, Kathy was after us for a couple of years to go over there, and I was kind of hesitant. I said, I've seen the castles, I've seen the churches, I've seen the hills and the mountains and so forth so many times. And I thought, okay, finally I weakened it. And so I opened the door. And what she did, she contacted the PR people with Klagenfurt. And I told her, I said, let's go over there after Labor Day. Sometimes when the crowds go away, they slow down a little bit. They have later falls, beautiful weather over there in the fall, so we can go there later. And as long as we're doing that, we'll see if we can catch a game too in the season because they get going. Well, unbeknownst to me, she made the contact with well, not unbeknownst to me, but she made contact with the PR guy from Klagenfurt, and they took it a step further. They said, "Whoa, they're coming back! Whoa, we're going to do more than just have hi and how are you?" And I was just hoping to go over there and see a few of the guys. I mean, we're talking 50 years ago. I hadn't seen these guys in
Yeah.
50 years. It's like a class reunion, and you don't know who's going to show up and what they're going to look like. But anyway, Gary and I were kept in the dark, and we went the day before the game to pick up tickets. That was the presumption that I was going to the rink for. They give us a little bit of tour of the upgrade and the facility and so forth. And we got all done, and there was we had a group of about 8, 9 people there because we had other people along with us also, including our housing parents that were with us or we lived with when we were there. And they said, "Oh, and by the way, here behind these closed doors here are your former teammates and their wives, and we're going to have a Wiener Schnitzel dinner, and we got the beer and all that camaraderie." Open the doors, and there they were. And in my generation, there was probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 players. Uh, Same thing with Gary, 6, 7, or 8 players plus their wives and so forth. And it just thought, whoa, this is way more than I expected. And I, I knew I had to be introduced to a couple of them because they had changed. And like I say, a class reunion, like you go in and say, whoa, some are, you recognize them right away, and some of them said, whoa, who was that? And well,
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, same thing happened there, but with so they really treated us well. I mean, it was fun, and that was the most fun part of the whole trip was just to see these other players and so forth, former players and so forth. But we also, so like I say, saw our housing parents that we lived with over there, and we went over to their house one time, one afternoon and visited with them for a while and so forth. And those were the special things for me. But it was definitely, my daughter called it a trip of a lifetime, and for me that will be, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was a tremendous time, and I would like to have been a fly on the wall in that room when you open the door and to see your face, those
Oh yeah,
former teammates and family.
they have an in-house TV crew there and so forth. So they interviewed both Gary and I, and they filmed a lot of it and so forth, and a lot of pictures were taken and so forth. But I yeah, I was blown away by it. That I was hoping to run into one or two and have a beer with them or something like that, but this was way more than that. So
Yeah. Well, that kind of, talking about that reunion, which I'm glad you did. It's wonderful to see that. Is the one thing that we have up north that I don't think a lot of hockey communities in the state of Minnesota do, and that's the association, and they have the reunion. We had COVID issues and it's been canceled, but the summer hockey reunion that we typically do every 5 years, Don. Um, can you talk about that and what you think, what your thoughts on that, and what makes us a little bit different as a community? We may not have the power, houses that we did back in the '60s, and that try to take a run of the championship once 10 or 15, maybe 20 years now, but just being able to do that, where teams come back, they play, they golf, and all that. Can your experience is still living there and being able to do that every 5 years.
there is no, I will challenge the whole state of Minnesota. There is no hockey community like the Roseau hockey community, and that does what we do with that 5 year, every 5 years hockey reunion and so forth. We do have a golf tournament every year also, but the reunion where the players come back every 5 years and have class games and so forth, and the attendance that comes and the anticipation of all the people that come to it, all the former players, their wives, and so forth, is something that's, yeah, it's unique. I have never heard of any other community. I mean, you can take the city schools; they might have their reunions, they might have a little bit of a golf tournament and so forth, but it's not. I would challenge them to come up there and take a look if anybody would, and just see what we do on those given years. The community, is tremendous. The support behind it and so forth, but the camaraderie, the memory, but it's part of the greater hockey community, like we were talking about before. Hockey people just have a history of camaraderie that no other sport seems to have, right? And like they might have it to a limited degree, but you can come up to you can go fishing in the middle of summer in the boat, and you're talking about hockey in Roseau. It's just that's
Yeah,
the way it is. And you go to Warroad, of course, they're the rival and so forth. Hockey will be talked about. It's just that's
exactly.
it's in our blood and so forth. But the celebrations that we have every year in the golf tournament, and then in particular every 5 years, where the players that come back, and the amount of teams and the amount of players that come back and still play, and this is part of the thing that I was going to get. I alluded to earlier a little bit earlier, but what I've seen uh, in the transition of the game is that it's kind of disappointed in a way how hockey has evolved. Where when I was coming through, and and I don't want to compare my time to everybody else's time. I'm not trying to do that. But what bothers me about the development of the game is that it has developed it to a point where we're not developing complete teams that are still and teams and players that are still hungry for the game after their senior year in high school. Roseau used to produce hockey players, not just Roseau, but the whole northern tier of the hockey and so forth, hockey in general. Remember, you can remember this, how many senior teams there were in the state of Minnesota playing senior.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
There was the senior hockey tournament that they used to have play downs within the state to get to the final eight to have a state senior amateur hockey tournament, and
Yeah.
then and so forth. And that slowly has faded. And you can probably tell me better than that. I talked to John Carter this morning, who was involved with Maha for years. I said, John, do you know of any senior hockey team in Minnesota right now that's they're still active? And
Yeah.
what
I don't. I
and what happened, that's faded away. But also then it continued on in my generation, it continued on to old timers hockey, with Bob Lund and so forth, developing or getting going our old timers hockey. We played for 15 years of competitive old timers hockey, going to Winnipeg in tournaments and winning these tournaments. Not all, but we won our share and then some. To the point where we went to Florida on a national level and we played and so forth. Played against some of the same players I played with and or against in the senior hockey division for guys from Minneapolis and St. Paul, Jim Westby. There was
Jimmy West, yes.
yeah. And look at Marv Jordy and the team. They had the Parkers and so forth.
Yep.
The love of the game of all these players that they weren't pros. They finished college. They went on, but they still loved the game so much that they still wanted to play it. They never could get enough, and that's why we continued to play this game as long as we did, and so forth. And I don't see that in the generations coming now. It's kind of sad in a way because I'm thinking you don't know what you're missing. It's
Yeah.
like, and I don't have an answer for it. I just wish there would be a discussion like what has happened to the senior hockey. Roseau used to send players to Gustavus Adolphus, Concordia College, even to Bemidji State before they became a power and so forth. And many players evolved and developed on those teams. Then you take a Joel Otto, played at Bemidji State, the
Yep.
career. There's a Jim McElmry. There's many Blaine Comstock, the Bruce Falks of the world. All these guys develop later, and now there seems like they're done. They might few of them try juniors and so forth, and then they go on. There's some success stories out there, but what has happened to the desire in the players to continue on and get more? Butch Brandt was a former Roseauite, and I at a state tournament about 8, 9, 10, 15 years ago. We were watching Roseau playing the consolation game or something at Mariucci. And we got talking about exactly what we're talking about right here. And he says, you know what comes to mind? And he said to him, he says, we could never get enough. And for
Yeah.
some reason now, they've had enough when it's high school. And that's the sad part of the whole situation is that you don't have to be a pro, you don't have to be the Olympic team, but where's your desire to continue playing? That's a frustration.
That's the love of the game.
That's the love
For
of
the
the
love
game.
of the game.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's why I continue to help coaching a little bit, and I do some broadcasting, and now I'm interviewing people like you, talking about that and
Yeah.
the differences back then and now. But they're still out there. Some are still out there, but I think you're right in
Well,
what you say.
I'll
It's a
just
culture.
I'll add Louis Nanny to the phrase here. Louis Nanny played in the '60 Olympic team. He had already gone through the Gopher program. He'd played in the Olympic team and so forth. And yet here he was out of that senior hockey, the desire to play. Eventually, he cracked the North Star lineup. Maybe a third or fourth liner, but Louis, he played for how many years? Then he became coach, manager, and so forth. And that's out of senior hockey. If that stuff that was playing, he played for the old Rochester Mustangs. That
Okay.
whole league used to be
I remember those
a
old days,
first
Don. I remember those old days when the old Clover Leafs, the old Leafs had the team, and then the Lakers down the road were playing in the old Cash League there,
overly
and winning the Allen Cup.
right.
And
Yep,
there's no
yep,
longer any days like that. I don't even think the Bucks have a team. I
yep,
might be wrong. Roger Buck, I don't know if he's still running a team, but there used to be all
yep,
over amateur hockey. But now it's no check,
exactly.
and even that's kind of shoddy. But
Yep,
um, I guess we've been on talking about 35 minutes or so. It's a good little talk, kind of casual, like I said, just talking hockey and talking about you because I think my best memories as a kid, playing with Steve and Mike, and we could talk about them a little bit. I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up, but it's going to your house, and that's why I wanted to talk about the Olympic aspect because going in the basement and looking, it's kind of like a little shrine. I was like, wow, I didn't realize it until after I got old. I'm like, you know what? That guy was pretty damn good, and that's what I wanted to get with you because I think you're very, very modest. You're one of the top. When they did that thing for MN Hockey Hub, top 100, I think you should be higher. It doesn't matter about the rating, but you definitely rank up there as one of the best. Different era, but
yep.
still, in my opinion, one of the best to play the game and the best to come out of Roseau. You're on a Mount Rushmore from Roseau hockey, in my opinion.
Well, I appreciate the thought there, Sid. I appreciate it. Yep. But like I say, the love of the game and the camaraderie are the memories I carry forward and so forth. And it was for me never about the money. I just didn't want to lose money playing the game if when I had a family and so forth, and that was including the trips over into Austria and so forth. But I might have been dumb and naive in some of my negotiations and so forth. But to me, I always wanted to play the game because I love the game.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe we'll talk to Gary about his experiences too at some point. Maybe get him on.
Yep.
Remember him slapping, coaching it for the Rams there, whipping a slap shot or two at me. You could shoot the biscuit too. You two guys had a good rocket. So,
Yeah.
um, two last things I guess I kind of wanted to go up, but I did want to bring up Steve and Mike. And how was that? You know, they were both weren't they born over there in Austria? Was it Mike or Steve or one of the two? Or
Steve was born in Austria. Yep. Yep.
okay, so you see, he could have been a dual citizen. He could have been playing over there for Austria.
Well, he could have. Yeah, he had a dual citizenship. In fact, he could play for the Austrian national team. Yeah, depends on your own idea what is professionalism or what is your birthright. I mean, it's up to them to
Yeah.
decide. So,
But
yep.
both those guys went on. You know, I'd be like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring them because they were teammates of mine. Mike went on to Western Michigan. I think he captained there. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
I'm not
Steve went on
sure.
to
But
St. Cloud. And
yep.
Steve went on to St. Cloud. So you know, you gotta be a pretty proud moment to have both your sons go on and play collegiate hockey, Division I level, and then some minor as well. And then of course,
Yep.
now both back in town and hopefully that little young man in Grand Rapids, Vin, is going to come on and carry on that tradition with the Ross bloodlines. He's kind of built like you, Don, the
Well,
grandson you got there.
it's the same thing that I hope for him that I hope for my kids. I told him, I said, you play the game. You're not playing for me. You're playing for yourself. If you like the game, you want to play it, go ahead. And I get looked at kind of cross-eyed sometimes when they talk about. And I felt guilty a couple times and so forth. My kids, where I lived in town, which was 3 or 4 blocks from school, no matter what the weather, at 6 o'clock in the morning when Dick Johnson had his practices and so forth, they didn't get a ride from me. They carried their
Well,
bag, stick through the bag, and that was it. You're not doing it. You're not. If you want to play this game, fine. If you don't like this game, you can quit at any time. And that's the way it's always been. And maybe that's why I don't know. That's just the way I was about it. So
well, that kind of actually goes into my last comment or question for it because I was going to ask you about that. I think you kind of answered it there too. Play for the love of game. Is that if you had any advice to give any young athlete now, you know, of all sports, but particularly hockey right now, because it's entirely different era, different generation, but still, any advice from someone who's played at all different levels. What would you say to that young, you know, someone came up and said, Mr. Ross, could you give me a piece of advice on what I should do or what about hockey or life in general? What
yeah,
piece of advice would you tell them?
just because you got a jersey and you made the squirt team, that's not ever going to be enough. You need more ice time. You got to do more on your own. You don't go to the rink for 1 hour and think you're done. If you want to go somewhere and you got to be somewhere, hopefully you have so much fun that the fire gets in your belly and you want more. And without doing more on your own, skating on you got to skate, skate, skate. You got to put the time in. And to me, a little bit, hockey has been a little bit over organized, too structured, and somehow they think the organized practice is enough, and it's not enough. You've got to do more.
I think you nailed it right there because what I tell kids when I'm trying to give them advice to is exactly what you just said there. The way to get better is not what I see you when you're in front of me on practice for that hour. It's what you do away from the rink on your own. And
Right.
you're right. You need that
Yeah.
extra
And they
kind of
and
your
they don't
teamwork.
and they don't need the watchful eye of the coach or their parents on them to because to me sometimes that stifles creativity. They want to try
Yep.
something. There's no room in a practice structured ice time to practice, try little things, try to learn and improve different things on your own. But you can go out in that shinny hockey and you can do it time after time after time until you finally get it down. And there's no drill that teaches you
Yep.
some of the stuff you can learn on your own.
The old terminology that where they got those T-shirts at the state tournament, that antique shop, you know, the rink rats. Rink rats.
Exactly,
That's exactly.
exactly. And you
Yeah.
talk to some of these old players, the Darby Hendrickson, I not old players, guys that have been out there and so forth. So many of them, the Eden Prairie guys. It doesn't have to be just Roseau. They talk about going to that neighborhood rink. That's where they have the most fun.
Yep. Yep. You know, I could keep talking for a long time with you here about hockey and stuff in general. It's been an absolute pleasure. You know, we chatted for about 45 minutes. Like I said, I wanted to make sure I got an interview with you, just chat a little bit about hockey because I think, like I said, you're, you know, like I said, one of the top 100, you know, from MMA Hockey Hub when they did
Well,
that. But I think, you know, like I said, part of Mount Rushmore for Roseau. You know,
Yeah,
Roseau hockey.
yeah. Well, it's up to somebody's opinion, I guess, but whatever. I'm proud of it, I guess.
I'll tell you this, Don. Don't be surprised if you don't see your mug on a print coming out of Roseau someday. For um, one artist that I talked to today may have something to say about that. That's
Yeah.
why I brought that up. So,
All
but I'm
right.
going to stop it. I thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm just going to throw this up on Facebook for the people that from up north and hockey people in general, just to listen and tell a bit. And thanks for the
Yep.
memories that I had as a kid growing up, hanging out with Mike and Steve at your house there, and being coached by your brother Gary, and just talking hockey with you. You've always been it's been a absolute
Yep.
pleasure to do this tonight. It was fun, and I enjoyed it. And hopefully, I'll cross paths here sometime soon up north.
All right. Very good. Thanks. Thanks
All
again.
right. Well, I'm going to end it at that. Thank you again. I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure, and yeah, thanks a lot for everything. Appreciate the
Oh,
interview.
all right. You bet. Take care.